Meanwhile, China's President Xi Jinping is hosting the leaders of 5 Central Asian nations. Analysts say it's a sign of Beijing's influence in the region. Jessica Washington reports from Xi'an.
In western China, this is Xi'an, the country's ancient capital. It was once the starting point of the historical Silk Road, a network of trade routes spread across Central Asia. And in this symbolic location, China is seeking to strengthen connections with its neighbours. For the first time, President Xi Jinping is hosting the leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan.
It would be very important for all 6 countries that they can talk about, how they can start economic recovery and continue the friendship and their very stable ties.
Central Asian countries are seeking to strengthen trade ties. And as Moscow pours funds into its war in Ukraine and faces the economic impact of sanctions, analysts say Beijing is an increasingly appealing partner.
China can play a more supportive role in the region and working with the region, but not at the expense of Russia.
Trade between China and Central Asian nations hit a record high of $70 billion in 2022. And many transport infrastructure projects, such as railways and roads, have been built in the past decade as part of China's so-called Belt and Road Initiative. The summit coincides with a meeting of the leaders of the Group of 7 developed economies hosted by Japan. China's growing influence is expected to be one of the main points of discussion as the US pushes for a more unified approach to dealing with Beijing. State-funded think tanks say the Xi'an summit shows a shift in the world order.
These 7 developed countries that dominate the current world order and have the monopoly power of the current world economic order are Western nations, while China and the 5 Central Asian countries represent the interests and demands of developing countries.
In this week of parallel summits, this is China's answer to multilateral diplomacy, reframing global affairs outside Western dominance and surrounding itself with friendly nations in a time of geopolitical uncertainty. Jessica Washington, Al Jazeera, Xi'an, China.
The 5 Central Asian nations are on the forefront of what Beijing calls its Belt and Road Initiative. It was launched in 2013 to expand China's economic and political influence. Trade relations between these countries have been increasing. After Russia's war in Ukraine, China's investments in the region grew to $70 billion. The gathering coincides with the G7 summit in Japan, but China's foreign ministry says it is not in competition with any third party. Well, Helen Thibault is an associate professor of political science at Nazarbayev University. She joins us from New York today. Helen, are there any lessons in the timing of this summit happening at the same time as the G7, despite what Chinese authorities are saying?
The timing might seem a bit peculiar, at the same time as G7, but at the same time, I would say it might be a coincidence. What I think is more significant is that the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, was announced actually 10 years ago at Nazarbayev University, where I work, by President Xi Jinping. So in 2013. So I think the 10th-year anniversary mark would be probably more significant and something that is much needed, indeed, because of the disruption caused by the war in Ukraine. So the Central Asian nations and China are looking for alternative routes to somehow avoid Russia, which doesn't mean that Russia is not involved in this process. And maybe elaborate on this further?
Sure, we can. Just a second, though. What is, on the 10-year anniversary, if we take stock of what China has been doing in this region, what is China's reach in Central Asia, and what's it trying to accomplish there?
Well, I think, again, like I just mentioned, because of the disruption caused by the war in Ukraine, so trade routes that would avoid Russian territory are on the agenda. This has been some of the projects that will be the highlight, I think, of the summit. For instance, the Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, China railway, which has been in the books for a couple of years now. and was stalled for different reasons. I think this will be a very important point of the talk. So to develop new routes, and for Central Asian nations, it's also very necessary, considering that, as auditors probably know, they are landlocked countries that desperately need new trade routes. So the creation of this Eurasian bridge between China throughout Central Asia and to Europe is necessary for all members.
You wanted to raise Russia's role here.
So I think so far Russian and Chinese interests are more they complement each other more than they are antagonistic, because Chinese influence expansion in Central Asia doesn't mean that Russia can also not strengthen its own relationships with Central Asian nations. Since the beginning of the war, trade between Russia and the Central Asian countries has significantly increased.
All right.
Including through the Eurasian Economic Union that China is not part of.
Hélène Thibault, thank you for joining us on the program today. Appreciate your insights.